Just a bit of prologue here. That is a quote from a guy called Yann LeCun, who's quite important. He is the head of AI for Meta, and is one of the people who kept the faith in neural network theory. There was a profound deep winter which affected both, as Jeavons said, and me in my heady days as a postgraduate student. Kind of killed my PhD, but there we go. And it became very unpopular. There was this guy called Marvin Minsky who said it would never work, and hence we had all the expert systems coming out. Marvin Minsky was wrong, and then everybody had to go back to neural networks in the late 80s, and Yann LeCun had kept the faith. He actually did the letter recognition task, I think, that Jerome showed. He developed that back propagation model to recognize letters. He came out and said something about these large language models. He called them stochastic parrots. He consequently said that might be an insult to parrots. The image here is DALL-E 3's idea of a stochastic parrot. It's actually pretty good. I'd say it's more of a fractal parrot, but there we go. There's some things to remember. These are models of language, and language isn't thought, but it seems to be that it's a pretty good mirror of a lot of the thought processes that go on. LeCun said that, you know, he looked at how much information had gone into these language models, and he was saying, like, it's somebody reading for 8 hours a day for 22,000 years. That's a lot of information. And I think it's wise to remember that when we see some of the more, to my mind, startling responses it can have. It's not sentient, it's not intelligent, but they are artificial. This is a story of a little experiment we did, because we work with these things quite a lot. We're going to look at a bit of segmentation it did, personas, more personas, modeling the responses, a validation test, because you always want to see if it's right in the real world, and some thoughts afterwards about the whole thing. We used Claude 2 from Anthropic because it allows a big input, much more at the time than GPT-4. That's subsequently changed in the last few weeks. And yesterday, Anthropic announced that you can put now even more data than GPT-4 into it. And it's worth thinking about when you want to do text summarization or this kind of thing indeed. We asked Anthropic to do a segmentation of the UK marketplace. That's what it gave us. I won't go into it too much detail, you can read about it, but that's the kind of division that it decided was valid for what it knew about the UK consumer marketplace. And it would also, if you ask it, produce this kind of map. It produced a similarity map of the various elements of the segmentation. And from there, we could run this thing called multidimensional scaling and get a map. And it's actually quite good at doing these things. We think we could probably ask GPT-4 to do that in entirety from start to finish without us having to do the statistics. So, my experience has been, whatever you think you want to do, ask it. Write a very long prompt. You'd be surprised what you'll get out the other end. This is an example of one of the more dense definitions you can get it to give, and this was from the segmentation, these things called rural traditionalists. It generated all the data you'll see on this screen, and you can just keep asking and it'll keep generating. We also, for each element of the segmentation, each part of the population, we asked it to generate 5 personas. Now, personas, as you probably all know, are much loved by market researchers because clients love them. I think clients love them because I think a lot of clients can't understand numbers. And therefore, if you give them a persona that encapsulates the numbers, it resonates more. And, as again, we probably all know, there are businesses out there that will generate personas for you, and it's quite a big business. But you can ask something like Claude or GPT to generate personas for you. And we also got the images from, at the time, the version of DALL-E. We learned that if you don't tell DALL-E what the race of the person is, it'll always make them Asian. So if you said male, 25, it'll give you an Asian picture. Apparently, after some digging, we found out that this was to get over bias. And it was actually documented, but at a certain point we thought, well, why are all these pictures coming out Oriental? It didn't make any sense. So you have to be quite specific. A few more, examples. The other end, the middle-aged hyperachievers. And, you know, most of these are very believable. Of course, we went through and read them and sort of saw if they were kind of crazy, you know, said that they were a world-famous mountaineer that climbed Annapurna and Everest, and we didn't find any real anomalies in that sense, you know, which is the problem of hallucination. Of course, this is total hallucination, if you like. It's just making these up according to the criteria you've given it, and of course to what its training's been of all this massive amount of language that it's absorbed. And, you know, it is a lot of information, and I think Lacan's characterization of it, of, you know, 8 hours a day for 22,000 years, really does give you an idea of just how much information has been put into these things. This is, again, a deeper analysis of a persona, more information. We did, for each persona, asked it to say, well, generate a typical week for, and here's Aaliyah's week. And it'll go through, and it'll tell you what they did on Monday, and, you know, all these things like late night client dinners that we're all very familiar with, I'm sure, you know, and catching time for video chats with families, responding to email, leisure and work, all very realistic. And another one for Cameron here, we'll just skip over that one. So, from this, we created a base reference of 12 segments, 5 personas per segment, so we had 60 personas, and then we added in the definitions of the 12 parts of the segmentation. So all in all, we gave it sort of 72 pages of information. We decided to do 1-page personas. So that was nowhere near the input size that Claude 2 can take. I think it's roughly 300 pages. They've now extended that yesterday to about 500. So we weren't really hitting any bounds. We could have, you know, said every persona was 4 pages long and really dug into some deep, meaningful details of their theoretical lives, but we left it there. And then you can ask questions of these personas. My joke was always, what colour would they paint their kitchen? It's unlikely that'll come out when you go, you know, give me a persona of this middle-aged hyperachiever, and it won't say, and he painted his kitchen blue. Or, you know, Farrow and Ball, probably, because expensive paint, you know. But it's something that would be a behaviour, but it's unlikely that it would be encapsulated in the persona. And we did do this with Gen Z personas, we made a chat button, got them to debate each other. It's really interesting to set them off running. Also, you know, you say, like, what do you think about the planets and ecology and how we're going? And it'll just go off and start generating responses. The word creepy comes to mind, actually, in that particular case. This was an example with these personas we generated of what they thought of the launch of Monzo, you know, one of the new wave banks, the online banks. And, you know, the question out of 10 was how would each segment score this idea for appeal to them? And so we'd asked, every persona was asked that question, and in fact, you just structure the prompt to saying, give this question to all these personas, and it'll generate a table for you with all the responses, rather than digging through a stream of text that comes out from the screen when you're interacting with them. If you tell it to give you a table, it will in general give you what you want. There have been some issues with that with GPT. We integrate it with another product of ours, and you can't tell the damn thing to shut up sometimes. It's like, just give me this information. It'll surround it with, well, I gave you that information because you asked this. And it's like, no, I just want to know this information. So you have to be very specific with your prompts when you want to get information out of it. It gave us this kind of mapping and said the Monzo sweet spot, of course, as kind of logical, is eco-friendly elites, tech-savvy suburbanites, and trendy fun seekers. It's all very believable, and when you look at the responses from these personas, it actually makes sense. But we wanted to do an experiment with both the personas, and, you know, they give believable results, and the real world. You know, something where we could go off to respondents and ask them a question. So we came up with 2 products. We thought a product test was a simple test. And bear in mind, this is a very simple test. My background's experimental psychology. I like to start off with simple tests and then, you know, get more complicated as you go along. We came up with 2 product conceptions. First one was called Frollies. Frollies are ice lollies made from real fruit and natural sugars. They're inorganic, unusual fruit flavours such as pineapple and mint, peach and lime, strawberry and black pepper. Their brand promises a premium organic frozen treat to indulge your cravings consciously. We actually gave those definitions and said, asked DALL-E 3 to give us the personification of that text. And this is what it came up with over there. And I thought it was pretty good for representing what we talked about. And these were generated by humans. We didn't ask Claude 2 to generate as a product conception, but you could do that, and there's a lot of work that has been done with that. This actually was my business partner's wife, Andy Dexter's wife, came up with this one. This was, we thought was pretty good. The other one was Cold Iron, a range of limited edition high-end premium tequilas. You know, you're an online Cold Iron club. Once a month you receive a different tequila, often flavoured like gin, with different herbs and botanicals. My opinion of tequila is kind of biased. I don't like it. My daughter likes it for reasons I don't understand. You know, but hey, you know, I can gather like gin, which is more my drink, but you know, a lot of people are interested in it. It's a possible product. It's you know, maybe appealing to people with more money, maybe the younger generation, who knows. So what we decided to do was a concept test, and we asked Claude 2, you know, what it kind of thought of these concepts. And the graph down on the bottom left here is these things called Schwartzian archetypes, which is a sort of cultural archetype system we use for analysing data and images. Asked it how it felt about those, what it thought it would map them as between tech-savvy urbanites, eco-friendly elites. We could do it for all segments of the segmentation, all different parts of the population. And when we asked all these personas about Frollies, this is the kind of data you get. We've got 5 rankings for each segment type. So out of all 12 segments, we've got 5 of the personas giving their rankings. Very specific questions of these personas. How would you rate this? And, you know, it's giving back very positive comments, which is Jerome pointed out when I did a walkthrough. He goes, yeah, typical, you know, all very positive comments. But, you know, I mean, that's very true. There are some segments where it's, you know, not so popular according to Claude 2, the struggling working class. Again, likely, and budget-conscious seniors. I'm going to be one of those, I think, in a few years, so I'm probably not going to be subscribing, you know, to anything too trendy. But, you know, very believable data. This, again, is the analysis of Cold Iron. The analysis that Claude 2 gave us as a concept. And so here's our test. We're going to ask that question about the concepts for Claude 2 with the extended personas. In fact, the extended personas were 1 page long. We decided to stick to a page. Could have made them longer, could have put more information, but that seems a logical amount of information. Given the size of the input context on Claude, currently you're probably limited to, they've upped it, so you're probably limited to 450 if you want to put a decent prompt in and more information, which isn't a huge sample size, but it's also not nothing. It's not 10 or 20. There was a limitation on the input size of GPT until, I think it was November the 6th when they announced the new model. And now it's much bigger. It's bigger than the old Claude, now Claude's got bigger. So there is a definite trend of allowing you to put more and more data into these models, which for market research I think is a great thing because it gives more and more facilities. We're used to dealing with lots of data. I mean, 200 or 300 records isn't that much. These days, thousands and thousands of records is more than normal. They're never going to get to the point, or not that I can see, where you're analysing a couple of 100,000 book reviews of Amazon, which is something that we often do for a client. So, you know, they've got a way to go, let's say. We also use the Yonder omnibus. Shout out to Yonder, we like their omnibus. and we got 1,080 completes. And that is, we asked people on the omnibus both the questions about the two products that we'd invented. We also asked, and actually I'm not reporting all of this data, we also asked Claude 2 the same question, but without giving the personas, which is basically saying, if there was a product like this, what would you predict the top 3 box percentage of the population would be? So you're not giving it all the persona information and using the personas to produce the response. You're just asking it to make a guess based on you telling it what the product is. And this is what the questions are. That picture's supposed to be surrealist cats answering surveys, if I recall correctly, is what I asked DALL-E 3 to give me. Claude, it was for each persona, give a rating out of 10 about how likely that persona would be to buy each product. In the no persona concedes just a simple question asking for the top 3 box percentage of the population. That is the percentage of the population that would be in the top 3 box of rating, like, you know, the most popular part. Omnibus, apart from not having a persona bit in it, rate each product out of 10 as to how likely you would personally be to buy this product. And the waiting bit was, you know, nothing against Yonder. We were a bit slow in getting in, and we sent it off, and we waited. We waited to see what the responses are. Now, these are the results. Our personas said, and on the left there you have Cold Iron, on the right you have Frollies. This is the percentage that's in the top 3 box. You can score that, you know, you take the averages of the responses, the results look, you know, the same in that respect. Cold Iron was, you know, I think that was 14%, and Frollies was a strong 25. That was what the real people said. 1,080 respondents from the omnibus. There was 1 percentage difference in both cases. In the Cold Iron, it was 1% higher than the personas, and in the Frollies, it was 1% lower. And that was a surprise, let's say. Now, when we asked Claude 2 with without the personas, it's quite interesting. The untrained, you know, if you haven't trained them, if you like, with the personas, the models kind of hedge their bets. They don't come out with a definitive number. They come out with, you know, 15 to 30%. So we kind of took the midpoint there. And so, in the right direction, not the same as the persona method would say, but also not the same as the real life respondents. Now, there are lots of caveats with this, you know, all sorts of things. And I think it's important not to extrapolate beyond the data. We also had a client we knew quite well that gave us 50 concept test surveys. And again, the results were 1 to 7 scale. And we also asked Claude the same question about the same concepts. And the correlation between the real life data we got from the client and the responses we got from Claude was 0.77, which is not a bad correlation. I have a very cynical view of correlation. Anything below 0.4, I just don't really think is that interesting because the amount of variance that it accounts for is not very high. Once you getting over 0.6 or 0.7, I think it's sort of worth looking at. 0.9 is really rare, I find, in our sort of business, but that was on a level of, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Right, our first question when we looked at the data, and that's a surprise stochastic parrot according to DALL-E 3, was did we confound it in some way? Had we transmitted the answer to this in the information, well, how we'd structured questions or whatever it was, or what the concept was. A while back, we have a survey, some data that we did, that we use as a test very often, which is all about Brexit. Yeah, I know, Brexit. And we asked at one point, you know, and told DALL-E 2 about this survey, and, you know, said, well, what would you guess to be the response of these questions? And it was actually pretty close. But then, of course, we realized that given the age of the models, they've been trained on a lot of data that was to do with possibly Brexit and people's opinions and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't really a very good test because it probably had that knowledge. It's very difficult because we don't, well, we know, but we can't, to my mind, we can't comprehend the amount of information that's gone into these models. You know, whether or not it's, if you like, a cold, rational test. But we didn't think we'd done that. Some perspectives on this is, you know, we weren't asking deep and meaningful questions. You know, it wasn't a particularly complicated question. It by no means was a long survey. But on the other hand, it did fairly well, I would say, in the answers. We kind of feel that this indicates that, you know, this type of stuff is good for at least simple questions. This approach will work. I'm not really keen on the term synthetic data, prefer qualitative modelling, but, you know, that debate will fall out in the future because what you are is modelling. You're modelling the response of a lot of people. Rather than asking the question, you're asking the language model to model the response. You know, and when we have traditional quantitative models, as another speaker mentioned, we've got more finesse if we can use the information that the person actually speaks, because usually you have to code what somebody says or ask them to condense how they behave to a numeric code, the possibilities you've got on the question. And very often that doesn't fit. And so by being able to use open-ended data, and you could say that you could use synthetic personas and you could use real-life data, and you could mix all that together, and that really might work very well. We feel that you've got better information, and the model can actually use that to predict. Just a word about the evolution of these models, because it's important for market research and our industry, because we, you know, as I said, data is key, the size of the data. We are seeing that the input text size is going up a lot. The latest GPT understands vision. I think it's GPT-4V, understands images. There are attempts to make the models more consistent, deterministic. There's this concept of temperature, which is, I don't know, how random/creative you want your answer to be. OpenAI have said that they're having this thing called a seed value. You know, the concept of random numbers on computers is deep and complicated, and you don't really want to get into it, but there is a construct within most programming languages where you can set the sequence of random numbers. I haven't really researched that very much, but it seems to me OpenAI is trying to say, well, you know, we can make, you know, you can have a mechanism to make the responses more consistent. Now the models have access to the web. The code interpreter facility allows you to run programs like Python. Oh, currently I think the only one you can run is Python, actually. Obeying the prompts all the while. This was something OpenAI specifically mentioned, that when you say output in a certain format, it always does output in a certain format. I've had it where, you know, you'll tell it to output in a certain format, but one time it doesn't. And the amount of data that it's up to date on. They're saying April 2023 with the latest model. So it actually has been through the Ukraine war now, which I think was kind of important. I think we really have to accept that there's some sort of knowledge structures in these things. They are a black box, but we've got to work out ways of making them less of a black box. People want an explanation of why these responses have come, and we're not going to be able to go around saying, oh, it's the model, or it's the weights in the model. I don't know. It's not much of a response when you're asked about these kinds of things. We need ways of probing these models. You know, and more highfalutin, are these models of culture? They've absorbed so much of what we are. I think there'll be very specialized models developed for different marketplaces, for different subjects, different product types, different populations. Hard to reach populations like CEOs, which traditionally, you know, are very specialized people we use to get past the gatekeepers. We could maybe model CEOs. And hybrid models, you know, using real life data and augmented that with model generated personas. I think the possibilities are endless. So, thanks very much. Remember that, you know, it was the new thing, it was the weird new thing. Doing interviews on the web, oh my God, it'll never work. And people will never accept it and all that. But the data came through much quicker and it was much cheaper. And after a couple of years, all these things about quality kind of died down because it was faster and it was cheaper. So I think they will, simply on economic grounds more than anything.
Okay, questions from the audience at the back.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi.
Ali Good from Gorilla in the Room. I query your bit at the end about analysing and probing the models, because I still have seen nothing, even with how clever it all is, that actually gets past the Chinese room problem that John Searle pointed out. So it's still for those of you who don't know, Chinese room is... he suggested that you could have a system whereby there's a guy in a room, you put a Chinese symbol in, and then he sort of responds in a Chinese symbol, it comes out, and gradually he learns over time that how, you know, the correct responses to the symbols that go in, but at no point does he ever understand Chinese. And I still think we have that problem. So trying to ascribe intention and understanding to a model like that is going to be incredibly difficult, if not impossible. That's more of a comment rather than a question.
Well, no, and I do agree, because I think we tend to anthropomorphise these things as though they think, and you fall into this way of saying that. Well, they don't think. They're not sentients, you know, and that was Lacan's original intention when he called them stochastic parrots. They're just parroting stuff back. But on the other hand, when, you know, the more you work with these things, you think, well, there is some representation of something in there, or I would believe that, and I'll call it knowledge, although knowledge I think is a human characteristic, and if you're not human you can't have knowledge. But I think there is some higher order constructs in there that it develops over time. You see, and you disagree, but you know, I don't know. Right, and I sympathise with your point, and I'm very torn about this, because I agree with Lacan, you know, a lot of the time with what he says, that it's a stochastic parrot, that it has no thought.
Yeah, how far do you think we are from a national representative set of synthetic data? And I'd like to know, you know, you talked about hard-to-reach sample. It's not going to work for a hard-to-reach sample because there's not enough data to build those persona.
Well, yeah, and that's very... First of all, I don't think we're very far from doing national representative models. The hard-to-reach data, well, there I would say is that maybe one of the roles of market research can be in getting data being used to calibrate these models, which can then be used for, if you like, research purposes. There is data from hard-to-reach people because it's done, but yeah, that's a fair point. You know, we need more data, which is a good thing for people like us.
You mentioned the word culture here. Has anyone done studies to compare differences between plowing through data from China compared to the US or
probably
Europe?
I'm not aware of it, but I'm sure that's been done. There's a guy on LinkedIn called Ethan Mollick. He's at Wharton School in Pennsylvania. and he, you know, he's a great source of information. I haven't seen him talk about that, but I'm sure somebody must be doing it somewhere.
Okay. Any final question? No? Oh, Mike.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for the presentation. Interesting you chose purchase intent as the question you're basing it on, which I'm hopefully not going to upset too many people. In research generally, we get overclaiming that. Did you kind of use that in the report you've done, or have you just reported the Yonder data as it came out?
As it came out.
And interestingly, if you then build in a factor that there is overclaiming it, it kind of leads towards perhaps the personas not being quite as effective.
That's
and the unpersona.
Yeah. No, as I said, there's a million caveats on it. That's a good point. As you say, purchase intent people, you know, always tend to appear more enthusiastic to buy the product than they are. Yeah, I mean, you know, maybe. We have used this on other data we can't report, though, with nothing to do with purchase intent. And it did, frankly, give scarily accurate results. So, you know.
Very fascinating. Thank you, Andrew.